Well, it's so good to be here again this evening. Thank you for braving the amazing Brisbane weather and coming out tonight. It feels like Melbourne. You've done well. Thank you for coming out. Hey, we've got a lot to cover once again tonight. I hope that you will not just enjoy the program, but you will gain something that's going to help shape your very own faith experiment. Faith is not something that you just do because someone told you to do it. It's something that you live by experimenting with it. And that's what I've been doing for the last 20 so years in my journey from an atheist to a faith experimenter. I also want to do a shameless plug. You guys plugged your YouTube channel. I'm going to plug mine. If you want to follow, I'd encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's just my name. Go to YouTube, type a name in, and subscribe to the channel. I put little updates there. There's different programs and things. This isn't there, but maybe one day it will be there. So if you want to follow that. But having said that, I want to start with a prize. Now, we've got a special prize at the end, as we usually do it. A special prize here this evening. And this is a book that I've written called Peace, Finding Peace Amidst the Storm. And last night we covered some really heavy information, didn't we? It was pretty heavy. And this evening, I would like to give one person the chance to get this little book. It's a really easy read to give you peace amongst the storms of your own life, not the things happening in the world, but amongst your own life. So to get this little book, and there'll be some more the last, we've got 3 more nights after night, got a couple of more I'll give away as well. To get this, I want you to raise your hand if you can answer this question. Here's the question. Last night, we talked about the imposter, the Antichrist. We talked about Rome and the New World Order, the expose of that. But what was the point of it? What was the fundamental point? It was between 2 people. What was the point? Is your hand up? Do you think you have the answer? Is it not Holly? Poppy. No, it's not Poppy. Okay, who had a hand up? All right. Worship, yes. It's about worship, but there was one, the last slide I gave you was a picture of 2 people. And the big question that we looked at is, why is this topic important? Why are we looking at imposters? Why are we looking at Antichrist? Why are we looking at any of that stuff? Because, yes? Yes, because there's a counterfeit. Yes, that's true. Okay, I'm really trying to draw this out. I'm not doing a very good job at it. Yes? I'm going to give it to you because you got the closest so far. The point was Jesus, the holy man. Come get your prize, by the way. So Jesus, remember the last slide was Jesus versus this imposter. And the whole point of the topic was, there you go, congratulations. Round of applause. What's your name? David. If you want to have the ultimate graduation from this masterclass, go get your notes off David, because he's obviously taking very good notes. The point I want you to take away from last night was simply this. The reason this stuff is in the Bible is because it's taking the attention away from the person of Jesus. That's the reason. And so as we continue this last part of this series, we're going to see more and more about this person of Jesus. Let's start with a word of prayer as we delve into tonight's topic. Father in heaven, thank you that we've been able to come out this evening and dig into this next two topics this evening. Help us to see this person of Jesus, even in these topics that seem to be taking us in dark places, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So tonight, our first topic, and then we'll have a break. Our first topic is about the global agenda, or the exposing the global agenda we looked at last night from a Roman perspective. It's not looking at it from an American perspective. In case you have been living under a rock, the United States of America has been dominating the news for a very long time. And in this country, so I'm the national content manager for Faith FM radio station. And the other day I was listening to different shows that we've got on the radio, and I noticed that every single show is talking about the current president of the United States. And I had to get them in a team meeting and I said, guys, this is exciting what you're all doing. You're connecting what's happening in the world right now to what we do on our radio programs. But let's not forget that there's someone more important than the president. And I hope that's what you will see tonight. We have been talking about this global world order since night 1. The dragon, the sea beast, and the land beast. We have seen already that the goal in Revelation, not according to popular vote, but according to Revelation, the goal of this global alliance is to seek for worship and allegiance. That's their goal, according to Revelation, a 2,000-year-old prediction. Now, we have been looking at, or we asked the question on the first night, who are these beasts? And we've looked at two of them so far. We've seen that dragon, which we said was the architect behind the whole story in Revelation, is none other than Satan or Satan. He's the enemy. Remember the enemy that sowed the seed into the field? Remember Rabbi Jesus talking about that a few nights ago? So we know the architect is this enemy. And the enemy's ultimate goal from the beginning of the story to the end of the story is he wants worship. Then last night we looked at this sea beast, the beast that rises up out of the sea, who acts as a front man for the architect. What's the architect trying to achieve? Worship. And so he creates this counterfeit system of worship, because if he can get people into that system, he will take them away from focusing on the true object of worship, which is the one who has the power to save. And that was Rome. We looked at last night. But tonight, we're going to explore this land beast, the beast that comes up out of the land. And once again, we're going to look at history, we're going to look at current events, but more importantly, we're looking at what the prophecy says. You've seen a pattern in this masterclass prophecy series, haven't you? We take a prophecy, we go, so this prophecy is claiming to tell us what's going to happen in the future, so now we've got a chance to test it to see whether or not the author is who he says he is, divine. So let's jump into this. The beast that rises out of the land. Let's read it. This is in Revelation chapter 13 and beginning in verse 11. The Bible says this. It says, "Then I saw another beast." Who was the first beast? The sea beast. But now another one comes up, and it's coming up out of what? The earth. Where did the first one come up? Out of the sea. That's the sea beast. This is the earth beast or the land beast. And notice this. It says, "And he had two horns like a lamb, but he spoke like a what?" Now, we already know what that symbol dragon means, don't we? Ultimately, that dragon is who? Satan. But we've already seen that Satan works through things, through agents, whether it was the serpent of old or whether it was the pagan Roman Empire trying to take that baby Jesus when he was born. Remember that story last night? We saw that through the Roman king and the Roman soldiers and the Roman governor. So the dragon was also ultimately Satan, but he works through things. So watch this. This beast, whatever this beast is, it's going to speak a lot like the dragon. But, notice this, it has two horns like a what? Now, here's an interesting thing. In John chapter 1, there's a book called John. It's a gospel. In chapter 1, there's a story about a man called John the Baptist. Ever heard of him? John the Baptist. And John the Baptist is in the story, and he says, listen, I have received this information from God. Again, claiming it's from God. And he says, there is going to be someone who's going to solve the problems that humans have. The ultimate problem, which is death. And the way he will solve the problem of death is he will take away the thing that causes our death, and that is sin. So he will solve the sin problem. And then one day, when that Rabbi Jesus we talked about the other night, when he shows up in this river Jordan in Israel, he shows up there, this John the Baptist, he points to him and says, "Behold," which means look, and he says, "the Lamb of God." So it's God's Lamb, this man. And what is he going to do? Why is he a lamb? Because he will take away the sin of the world. So John points to this Rabbi Jesus. Remember the other night he showed up after he got baptized? He says, "The time is fulfilled. I'm here." Fulfilled Daniel chapter 9, that prophecy. So John the Baptist points to this Jesus and says, He is the Lamb of God. Now, from that point on in the story, the symbols of the Old Testament where lambs were sacrificed for sin has been overlaid with the person and the work of Jesus, the rabbi, the holy man, as the Chinese refer to it, as the Messiah, as the Old Testament talks about it, and the Christ according to the New Testament. So we have this imagery that the Lamb is who? Jesus the Christ, the anointed one, the chosen one. Now, every time you read the New Testament, when Lamb is referenced, it's talking about the person of Jesus. When you get to the last book of your Bible, the book of Revelation, there's 22 chapters in this book, and in those 22 chapters, the lamb, the symbol of a lamb, is used 25 times. And every single time, lamb is referencing, guess who? It's Jesus, because the book is called the Revelation of Jesus. This is the only time that the word lamb is not directly connected to Jesus, but a beast. This beast has two, what are they? What's lamb like in the story? Horns. So these horns look like Christness. That's not a real word, but you get the idea. Whatever this Christ is, this anointed, this Messiah, whatever he's all about, these horns look just like it. But when it opens its mouth, this nation, this power, this system, what does it sound like? Now that doesn't sound good, does it? It looks like Christness, but when it opens its mouth, it sounds like the dragon. Now this is a pretty profound picture we're being given here in the book of Revelation. There are 5 identifying characteristics that help us unlock who or what this land beast is, or who it is, yes. Let's have a look at them. The first one is, we've already seen it, is it arises from a different kind of region to the sea beast. We're going to say here it arises from an unpopulated region. Notice what it says in the text. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the what? The earth. Now, last night, we saw that the sea, where the sea beast comes up, or the water where the sea beast comes up, is equal to what? People. Remember what we saw in Revelation 17, verse 15? It says, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So that's the water, that's the sea. Now, if that's what water is, a populated area, what's the opposite of water? Land. So if water is populated, what's land then? It's the opposite. It's unpopulated. To understand this, let's look at the history of what we call today the United States of America. In the old world, when we talk about the old world, we're talking about Europe. We're talking about the division of Rome in 476 and the establishment of those nations of Europe, the old world. In the old world, we saw last night there was great persecution. See, here's the problem. Remember that little horn was different to the other 10? Remember that from last night? It was different. And what was different is that it's a horn. That's a kingdom. But when it spoke blasphemy. And blasphemy is religious. So we have a political system enforcing or proposing spiritual or religious values. And this is always dangerous. In the history of our world, whenever a political system imposes a religious view, somebody gets persecuted. For example, let's say that this country of ours decides to enforce Islam, as an example. What would happen to the people who didn't want to be Islamic? They would be persecuted. But what if this great country of ours decided to enforce Buddhism and made you all get up at 4 a.m. in the morning and start with a cold shower and then meditate for an hour and say, you didn't want to do that, because I know you don't want to do that, right? Well, then all of a sudden you're going to be persecuted because you're not a part of the state religion. Now let's flip it. What if our great country decides to enforce Christianity? What happens to the Muslims? What happens to the Hindus? What happens to the Buddhists? What happens to the atheists? Well, they get persecuted. And this was the problem in the old world, in Europe. Because the only system in town was enforced Christianity. And I say that loosely because I don't believe it's true Christianity, because Christianity is not enforced. When Rabbi Jesus came and talked about this stuff, he said, you come to me. You don't get forced to me. And so the system was flawed from the very beginning. The religious intolerance in the old world was the ingredients for the birth of a new nation. And what happened was, as the people in the old world were getting fed up with being persecuted by this only power in town, the church and state combination of the Holy Roman Empire, so to speak, they decided that they wanted to risk everything to go to another part of the world in order to have a fresh start. These people were known as the pilgrims. And these pilgrims got onto boats and they sailed across waters that they had never heard of, except for one individual, Christopher Columbus, had successfully gone to and come back. And they thought, we got more chance of getting in a boat and facing the unknown than staying here in the old world. Think about how bad it must have been. So they get on their boats and they sail to what would be eventually the Americas, North America particularly. When they land there were approximately, according to historians, approximately 1 million Native Americans. This is in the year 1620. Now, a few years later, in 1776, when the American War of Independence began, they have documents to say that there were 3 million people on the continent, North American region. Now, let's put that in contrast to the old world. Remember, the old world is many sea, it's a big sea, nations of people. In the old world, in the 1600s, there were 78 million people living in Europe. 78 million people. In the new world, there were 1 million. Would you say that's the equivalent of the sea, populated, versus sparsely populated with the land? So the Bible's got this right. It's saying there's going to be this one beast coming up out of this very populated part of the world, but then there's going to be another beast coming up out of another part that's not populated in comparison. Does that make sense? That's number one. Number two, it would arise around 1798. You say, Robbie, that's very particular. It is. Let's have a look what it says. It says, this is verse 11, it says, then I saw another beast coming up out of the land. When I was an English school student in high school, I hated it. I hated every day of English. English is a horrible language to learn, right? By the way, it's the only language I speak. But I hated English. I thought, why do I have to go to school to learn English when I already speak it? Like, why do I have to learn it? The reason I hate it is, and if you've learned English as a second language, you'll know what I'm talking about. The grammar in English is shocking. It's the rules, it's exceptions versus the rules, right? But anyway, here's one thing that I did learn, and I want to share it with you because this is a masterclass. Here's what I learned. When you see the word then, it means that something has already happened before it. Did you know that already? Of course you did. You're at a masterclass. You guys are geniuses. So here's the point. Something's already happened in the previous verse. In verse 10, something's happened, and then verse 11 happens. Does that make sense? Let's read now what the previous verse says. It says, he, referring to the first beast, the sea beast. And who's the sea beast? It was the Holy Roman Empire with the papal power at its head. Then he, the sea beast, who leads into captivity, shall go into what? It's a little bit of a cryptic sort of pose or prophecy in that it's saying this power is going to lead many into captivity, both spiritually and physically. And did we see that last night? You better believe it. More than 50 million people suffered physically at the hands of this power, but countless billions have spiritually. So does it lead into captivity? You better believe it. But it says, he who leads into captivity will go into captivity themselves. Does that make sense? Now, did we see that happen last night? Remember, it received a deadly wound. What year was that? 1798. What was the event? General Berthier of Napoleon's revolution marched over there to Rome and took the Pope captive, inflicting what the newspapers called the mortal wound, or the deadly wound. So that's 1798. That's the last thing that's talked about here. It says, he who kills with a sword must be killed with the sword. So this is describing the end of this papal period. That's phase 1. Remember, we saw phase 1, then we saw phase 2 when it got its deadly wound healed. So here's the context. It's going into captivity. What year? Literally, it was 1798. So as it's gone into captivity, the very next verse says, then another beast comes up out of the earth. So as one is going down, 1798, we're expecting to see another one coming up. Does that make sense? Let's have a look. So the colonies in the United States, it wasn't the United States at this point, it was literally just colonies. There were the Puritans, there were the Quakers and various others that got on boats and came across, people on the boat like the Mayflower and those things. They came across and they established in North America, and this was the time of the Pilgrim Fathers, as known as in American history, around 1620. So quite early on. As we saw before, war at independence was won in 1783. So 1783 is when they declared their independence from the British. And then in 1787, the US Constitution was written. It was ratified in 1788, and it has been in operation, meaning it's been the law of the land, since 1789. That's pretty incredible, isn't it? If we overline these two things, by the way, I make that point because a constitution is the birth certificate of a nation, constitution. So watch this. Phase 1, we see this already, 538, papal power comes up out of the sea. It continues on for 1,260 years, and it gets its deadly wound in 1798. But in 1789, the constitution of this new world with very few people has just been created. There's been a war of independence, and now we have a new nation emerging, which becomes the United States of America. Incredible. Exactly as the Bible indicated. One is going into captivity, and now one is ascending out of the land. Does that make sense so far? I mean, this is remarkable. This is a 2,000-year-old prediction. Number 3. This power will become a global, political, and economic superpower. Here's what it says. This is later on in the story. This is verse 16. We start in verse 11. We got 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So a lot has happened, which we're not going to cover in this period. But we'll jump to this part. This is what it becomes. This is the land beast. This is what I'm proposing is the United States. He causes all. Now, if I was to say, I'm going to cause you to fall, what am I implying? I have the ability to cause you to do something, to impact something. When it says he causes all to receive a mark on his right hand or on his forehead, when it says that, it means that this power has the ability to make it happen. You can replace the word cause with force. This is a pretty powerful nation. Remember the two characteristics? It has horns like but it speaks like ooh. It continues on and says, what's it going to force people to do? Receive a mark of the right hand on the foreheads. Why? That they may not what? Buy or sell, except those who have the mark of the beast, the name, the number, and so on. So this power is going to have the ability to bring about what I will describe as, it is going to affect, it's saying that nobody will be able to do this, which means that it's got complete global influence. No one will be able to buy or sell, that's economic, and except you have this or that, that's a control. We saw this on the first night under our topic of digital currencies. This power, this beast rising up of the land, will have the ability to bring about global economic control. To be able to do that means that you are a global economic superpower. Not just that, remember we saw on our first night, this same power will have the ability to bring about physical coercion. Remember that? From those who were here on night one? To have the ability to do physical coercion, which means you have to have military strength. In fact, look at this. This is the largest economies in the world by GDP. This is the United States. This is 2023, by the way. Where's Australia, everyone? You understand what I mean. There's no one even close. China's close. But we'll see what these tariffs do. But anyway. Here's the military superpower might. This is the budget of the United States on military. The next one is China. And then you can see here's the rest of them. And we're somewhere in this group here, the rest of the world. We don't even rate. This is incredible considering this nation started with absolutely nothing. And now it is the superpower. It's been the superpower for many, many decades. But this prediction says this thing's going to have the ability to speak like Rome. Now here's the interesting thing. Literally Rome, as in pagan Rome, when it gave its power to the papal Rome, the significance of the imperial Roman Empire was that it had two things going for it. It had this thing called the Senate, and it had this thing called military. And with those two things, Rome ruled the world. And now we have told in the Bible that there's going to be a new power coming up out of this land that will have the same voice as Rome before it. It's phenomenal, the clarity that this brings. So the United States today is the financial leader of the world. In fact, notice how they see themselves. This is Time magazine in 1999, the last issue for the end of the last millennium. This is what it says in Time magazine. It says, no other nation, referring to the United States, has exercised such military, economic, diplomatic, and cultural reach since who? Since Rome. That's imperial Rome, the Caesar Rome. America bestrides the world like a colossus. This is how the American people are communicating about themselves. They're saying, listen, never in the world, in the history of the world since Rome ruled the world, has there been another nation like the United States of America. That's ironic, isn't it? Because that's exactly what this prophecy looks like. This power will have the ability to speak the way the dragon did, which was Rome in terms of the persecuting power. New York Times in year 2002 said this regarding the United States of America. The fact is, no country, United States, has been as dominant culturally, economically, technologically, and militarily in the history of the world since who? The Roman Empire. People who aren't religious see it. And here's a book 2,000 years ago that hinted at it. It's incredible. You know, we could ask ourselves, the technology you have in your phone, even though it was probably made in China, it comes from the United States. The movies that you probably watch are not good for you, I'll tell you that right now. You got that, right? The movies that you're watching are probably not good for you, but I guarantee they've been influenced by the United States. If you have a Netflix account, the United States is influencing you culturally. The impact and reach is phenomenal. Phenomenal. But notice this, it says, and he exercises all the authority of the first beast. The authority of the first beast we saw last night was when imperial Rome gave the power to papal Rome. So if it's exercising the authority of the first beast, it is exercising the authority of imperial Rome. Have you ever noticed some of the imagery of the United States? Eagles. Do you know where that comes from? From Rome. If you walk in and look at any of their symbols, the seals and things, all different departments, it echoes the Imperial Roman Empire. It's phenomenal. Number 4, this is where it gets interesting. It says, it predicts that it would join forces with that sea beast. That sea beast was Rome, as in papal Rome. This is what it says. After he exercises all the authority of the first beast, that's papal Rome, and in his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to what? To worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. Which beast had a wound that was healed? It was papal Rome. This is predicting in verse 12 that this new power, this land beast, this America, United States, we see it fulfilling today, this predicts that it is going to do something radical. It is going to cause people to go along with the agenda of Papal Rome. Now, when I first read this in the year 2002, I was an atheist. And when I understood that these characteristics of he here, this beast, this second beast, could fit nothing else in the United States, I thought, this is incredible. The United States came into existence because the people were fleeing from what? Persecution. Persecution from who? Papal Rome. But this is indicating, yes, it came out of Papal Rome, it fled from Papal Rome, but at some point it will turn and go back to Papal Rome. This is incredible. I lived in the United States for a number of years in the early 2000s, and I used to share this. And the Americans were very confused. But they're not so confused anymore. Let me show you. The first papal visit to the United States occurred October 4, 1965. What year was the Constitution? 1789. That's a long time between those two events, isn't it? Do you know why? Because if a pope showed up in the United States between that date and this date, he wouldn't survive. Because they were a Protestant country, meaning we left you behind over there because of the problems you caused our ancestors. We don't want you in our territory. But something changed. In 1965, the first papal visit took place in the United States. It was Paul VI, and he visited with Lyndon Johnson in New York City, October 6th. Now, you don't know this, but it says he visited where? New York City. Do you know where the United States President resides officially? In the White House. What city is that in? Washington, D.C. Do you know that when any head of state comes to the United States, the president never goes to meet that person? That person has to fly to Washington, D.C. and then come to the White House to meet the president. The president doesn't meet anybody anywhere except in the White House. But you'll notice, where did they meet? Why did the President of the United States go to New York City to meet the Pope on his first trip? I'm glad you asked, because you're really curious, aren't you? Time magazine told us in 2015, because a big event happened in 2015, this is what they said. In 1965, Pope Paul VI planned to trip to New York in order to address the then relatively new what? United Nations building is in New York City, in case you don't know. So the Pope has come to the New York United Nations to speak. Watch this. The challenge for the United States officials was that the nation didn't have, what's that word, everybody? Formal diplomatic relations with the Vatican. There was no ambassador to the Vatican. The Vatican being the Holy See of the Roman Church. So because there was no ambassador from the United States to the Holy See, as they call it, then when the Pope comes to the United States, the problem is there's no procedure, there's no etiquette, there's no diplomatic relations. So the President of the United States goes to New York, to the UN, to meet with the Pope. This was a really big deal from an etiquette point of view. But look what it says next. Many Americans believed that to do so, to have an ambassador with the United States, with the Vatican, many Americans believed that to do so would, what's that word, everybody? Violate the separation of church and state and could give the Holy See undue influence. So in the mind of Americans, we don't want an ambassador from the United States going to the Vatican because that would mean that we would have a problem with this church-state relationship because the Vatican is not just a state, it is a church. And if we did that, it would create an unnecessary situation where there could be influence of Roman Catholic, into the White House. Notice the last sentence though. Washington changed its mind in the early 80s. Do you know what that means? They sent an ambassador to the Vatican. And to this day, there is a Vatican ambassador from the United States and vice versa. Something changed. This is a country that came into existence because they were fleeing the persecution. It's phenomenal. But something changed. So look what happened. They call it the Holy Alliance between Papal Rome and the United States, 1989. This is Ronald Reagan, the president at the time in 1989, and this is Pope John Paul II. Both of them have passed away since then. What happened in 1989 was phenomenal because it articulates, I think you all know about the Berlin Wall, right? You've heard of the Berlin Wall. It fell in 1989 in the fall of the Soviet Union. So basically, in this article, it talks about how at the first meeting, Reagan, that's the President of the United States, and Pope Paul II, the head of the Roman Catholic Church, discussed something else they both had in common. Both had survived assassination attempts only 6 weeks apart in 1981, and both believed that God had saved them for a special mission. And the mission that they go on to talk about is to bring down communism. And so the two of them work. Look at the title. How Reagan and the Pope conspired the Holy Alliance, how Reagan and Pope conspired to assist Poland's solidarity movement and hasten the demise of communism. The whole point of their meeting was, we've got a common enemy, and that's communism, and we're going to work together to take it down. And the whole article, which came out a couple of years later, talks about how the relationship between the Pope and the President of the United States, how they work together secretly with their intelligence and all this stuff to bring down the Berlin Wall. It's absolutely remarkable that for the first time in human history and the history of the United States, there was coming together of church and state. Not just any church, the Roman Church. Woodrow Wilson was the first president to visit Pope Benedict XV in the Vatican, and that was in January 1919. Here's a picture of him going there as he goes to visit. Now I'm going to give you a quick rundown of American history of all the popes and presidents who have met. So here's Dwight Eisenhower meeting Pope John. Here's John Kennedy, JFK, meeting Pope Paul VI. Lyndon Johnson, same Pope. Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan. Here's the point. Every president since that first meeting every president has gone to see the Pope. Something's changed. A country that was based on fleeing from the persecution of Rome is now stopped and turned around and is going back this way towards Rome. George Bush Sr. meeting Pope John Paul II. Bill Clinton. George W. Bush. I mean, every single pope has been visited. And then this photo took place, I was living in the United States when this happened. This is George W. Bush, he was the current president. This was his father, who was also a president. This is Bill Clinton, who was also a president. And somewhere over here, I think it's over here somewhere, is, I think it was Jimmy Carter. These are the presidents of the United States, and they're all kneeling before the body of Pope John Paul II. And I remember reading a lot of articles in the United States press, like secular press, going, how is it that our leaders are kneeling before the Roman Church? Phenomenal. Something has changed. But then we enter into the 2000s. Barack Obama, he went and visited the Pope. He visited the next Pope after he resigned, and Pope Francis. Pope Francis visited Trump in his first term, or sorry, the other way around, Trump visited Pope Francis in his first term. And there was a growing papal bond that was definitely evident in this relationship. And then when Joe Biden became president after Donald Trump, something historic happened. The Pope gave the first ever address to the joint houses. So the Senate and the Congress met in the United States, and for the first time in American history, this was in 2015, the Pope came and addressed the American lawmakers. This was phenomenally important. This is what the House Speaker said at the time. He said, "What a day. What a moment of our country. I'm so proud that so many came to greet the Pope here at our capital, the world's greatest symbol of democracy. The Holy Father's visit is surely a blessing for us all." He was so excited that the Pope would come and speak at the lawmakers' assembly. And then just a few weeks ago, the current president went to the Vatican, and this is the casket for Pope Francis. So something has changed in the history of the United States. Can you see it? A country that fled from the oppressive power of the system has definitely turned its tune and changed its direction back towards Rome. The fifth characteristic of this prophecy is it says it would make an image to the beast. Here's what it says. And he, this is the land beast, the United States, deceives those who dwell on the earth by signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. Who was that beast that was wounded and lived? It was papal Rome. But here we have the United States, if we got it right, and I think we do, the United States is turning to, look what it says here, telling those who dwell on the earth. Now remember, where did this beast come up from? From the earth. And what did we say that earth region was? It was the opposite to the old world. What was the old world? Europe. So this is the new world. What's that? The Americas. Here we have the beast telling those who dwell in that territory, so we could say the citizens. So here we have the state power telling the citizenship, saying, listen, those who dwell on the earth, make an image to the beast. So the state is not doing it, the state is encouraging it. But who has to make the decision? Who's he asking to make the decision? Telling those who dwell on the earth. What's the earth? North America. Telling those who dwell on the earth to do what? Hey, make an image to the beast. See, in the United States, they say that the government is by the people, for the people. And so the people have to ask for this thing. But what are they asking for? An image to the beast. Who's the beast? Rome. So they're asking for something. An image is a likeness or reflection. It's not an exact likeness, but it's a reference. Like if you go to the mirror and look in the mirror, you see your own image. Is that you? Well, it's an image of you. It's not you. And so something's going to happen here where they're asking the people, hey, give us the authority to make this thing that looks just like Rome. Now, what is it that makes Rome Rome? Papal Rome I'm talking about here. An image is a likeness of something that is a replica of something. And they're asking the people of the United States, hey, give us the authority to make an image after the likeness of Rome. Well, here's the difference. Rome is and was an alliance of what? Church and state. That's what makes it different. Remember, it's a little horn that's different to the other 10. Now the American entities of power are turning to their subjects and their citizens saying, hey, let us make an image to Rome. Well, the only thing that Rome really has as a characteristic is church and state. Now, what was America founded on? The principle of separating church and state, which brings us back to these two lamb-like horns. Remember that the lamb is always a reference to who? To Christ-likeness. Here's what it says. Remember, we read it? Had two horns like a lamb. Horns represent powers or strengths. It's got two of them. The United States, when it comes up, it's got two powers that look very Christ-like. Here's where we get that idea from. In Psalm 18, it says, the Lord is my strength, in whom I will trust. The what? Horn of my salvation, my stronghold. So a horn is the symbol of strength. This beast, the United States, has two horns when it comes up. Two strengths. Here they are. America was once referred to as a social experiment because the founders of the United States were trying out what? A new form of government never before seen in the courts and governments of Europe. They called it the Great American Experiment. In fact, it's still called that. The American Experiment. Why? Because for the first time in human history, a civilization was trying to establish a country that was based on different principles that had never before been seen. And the reason for that is because in the old world, they were suffering a great persecution. They decided, we're going to do something different. We're going to do something radically different. It's an experiment, but let's do it. And here's what it was. The two great strengths of the United States was, number one of those horns was religious freedom. The second great strength was civil freedom. You see, in the old world, what was their problem? Is that if you lived in Germany, the king or the prince of Germany at the time, whatever religion he was, you had to be, because the politics and the religion were combined. And then over the whole empire, there was this power called the papal seat. And if he had political power, you went along with him. So in this new world, they said, listen, we're going to do things different here. We're not going to be like the old world. We are going to give every single person two great freedoms. You can worship whatever you want, and nobody can touch you. You don't even have to worship anything, and nobody can touch you. That's the first great strength. The second strength was, you are never going to be enslaved to a hierarchical, ongoing, hereditary bloodline. Not going to do it here. If you don't like your leader, we will vote them out, in theory. And to be honest, this great experiment has been thriving for the last few hundred years, almost 400 years. So much so that most people on planet Earth outside of Australia, because if you're in Australia, you're nuts to go anywhere else. But, thank you, one person. But people who live outside of this great country of ours, they are trying to flock to the United States because it's the great land of opportunity. You can worship what you want to worship. You don't have to be worried about the political persecution. It's the great American experiment. It was phenomenal. And those two strengths are Christ-like. Christ doesn't force people to follow him religiously. He doesn't force you to follow him politically. The invitation is always, come. Come. Not force. And so the Bible recognizes this fact by saying, listen, this is good. But the problem is, as we've seen, when it opens its mouth, it speaks like the dragon. And when the dragon speaks, it's always, by the way, how does a nation speak? It speaks through its laws. And laws only have strength if you have the military might to enforce it. And so this power, although having two great strengths, it will turn, as we've seen. So what happens? The religious freedom is you will not have to worry about popes in this country. You will have freedom of religion. You can worship according to dictates of your own conscience. And political freedom, if you don't like your president, vote them out. That's the famous sort of cry that they've used in American literature over the last few hundred years. We have freedom from a king in this great country of ours. That's what they say. And as a result of these two great strengths, or these two horns, they have had a wall of separation between religion and politics. They call it church and state, the wall between the two. But here is the problem. This prediction says that the state's going to turn to the people and say, let's make an image to Rome. And the image of Rome can only be one thing. Let's get rid of the wall. And let's have church and state. Let's have the political oneness and religious oneness again. And so here's the problem. If this is true, if this really is the United States of America, then what this indicates is that the wall has to crumble. I don't want it to crumble. I quite like living in a world where America has this great principles of separation, church and state, because it makes all of us look good. If America crumbles, we crumble with it. Have you read our Constitution? I'm sure you have. Oh, come on, you're Australians. If you read the introduction to the Australian Constitution, our authors, whoever they were, we don't call them founding fathers, but the authors of the Constitution of Australia, they thank the Americans for their Constitution because we modeled a lot of it. We don't have the same rights they have. In fact, we have less. But we are modeled on the American system to some extent. But look at this. The wall is crumbling. Not will. The prophecy said it will 2,000 years ago. I'm telling you tonight, the wall is crumbling. Notice what the history tells us. This was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He's no longer, he's a former Chief Justice. But the Chief Justice is the highest level of interpretation of the Constitution. This is what he said regarding church and state. He said, the wall of separation between church and state is a metaphor based on some bad history. And his point is that it shouldn't be there to limit us anymore in the present. This is his point. Now, if this is the highest level of legislative interpretation of the Constitution, and he's saying, look, it's the church and state thing, that's just a bad metaphor. It means that the minds at the highest level are taking the country in a different direction. You say that's one person. Yeah, that's one. Here's another one. 2003. Is the church-state wall crumbling? Question. This is because of President Bush having all these faith-based initiatives. President Bush was very religious, and so he would promote all these religious things as the president. People saying, hey, wait. Is it crumbling? Is what's going on here? Look what happens next. Almost 20 years later, CNN, a news source you can trust, says brick by brick, the wall between religion and government is, what's that word, everybody? Collapsing. Something's changing. And this was under President Biden, and he was a friend to CNN. They're saying something's changing. By the way, President Biden was Roman Catholic, as was JFK. So then, in 2022, Reuters says the United States Supreme Court takes aim at the separation of what? Church and state. And so what we're starting to see, just in my little lifetime in this journey of a faith experiment, in the last 20 years, when I've started tracking this stuff and I've started to care, is we have seen a deterioration of church and state being separate in the United States, which is ironic considering the history of the country. But it's not surprising if you're a student of Bible prophecy. Every characteristic is coming together remarkably accurate. In 2022, Washington Post says, under right-leaning Supreme Court, the church-state wall is crumbling. And this is in the context of when Donald Trump was president the first time, he made appointments to the Supreme Court, as most presidents get a chance to do once in their presidency. And a lot of the people that were elected are seen as very conservative religious views at the Supreme Court. And so the liberals will obviously go, well, it's all crumbling. But when they start overturning laws that have been in fact in place for the last 60 years, people start taking note of this. Something is changing. And then prior to the election that just took place, there was a thing that got out called Project 2025. And many said it was conspiracy. People asked the candidate, President Trump, about whether this was his working, and he said, I know nothing about it, I haven't read it, I don't know. But this is what the critics, and critics will always be critics, but this is what the critics have said. Critics have characterized Project 2025 as an authoritarian, what kind of authoritarian national plan? Christian nationalist plan to steer the United States toward autocracy. Legal experts have said it would undermine the rule of law, the separation of powers, separation of what? Church and state. Now, I'm not an American, none of this stuff applies to me. But what's fascinating is that there is very strong indication that everything in this plan, which was for the first 100 days of who the next Republican president would be, everything in that first 100 days they're proposing here, and most of it's happened. In fact, there's a website, I forget the address, but you can go look it up, and it tracks all the items in this project, in this white paper, and then it puts what has actually been fulfilled in the first 100 days of President Trump. It's remarkable. Now, take it for whatever you want. All I want to do is say this. This isn't to say one guy's a bad guy, this guy's a good guy. Not to say that. All this is to say is that the leading minds in the United States have shifted. That's my point. Are you with me? Can you see it? Can you see it shifted? And it shifted remarkably in the exact direction that these prophecies 2,000 years ago indicated. Which means, once again, we are looking at a supernatural book. So we see the dragon, we see Rome, and I think we've got very good evidence for this being the United States of America. And these three working together to ultimately bring back a removal of church and state, creating church and state once again. And this will not be a good thing for any of us. Because, as I said, if church and state are combined, somebody will be persecuted. So 5 predictive elements we've seen in this presentation. We've seen already how that first phase of the papal power, the sea beast, arises out of the sea in 538. It continues for 1,260 years, but gets deadly wound. Then tonight what we've seen is that a second beast comes up in the new world, opposite to where this one came up. It arises around 1798. As this one's going down with a deadly wound, this one's arising out of the land. It'll become a global political and economic power. It joins forces with the beast, the sea beast, and it will make an image to that beast. 5 things. There's a lot more to this, but we're focused on just these 5 things. So far, that's happened, that's happened, that's happened. This is happening, clearly. And the last thing is yet to happen, which is good news. So here's the question. By the way, the interesting thing, and I didn't want to do too much on slides on this tonight, but the interesting thing is I don't know what it means. I'm not a all-knowing, all-powerful person, but what's interesting is that for the first time in history, yesterday, we're told that now there is an American Pope. I don't know what that means, but I don't think it's a coincidence. And I'm not saying this to freak you out. You ought to go sell everything, go jump in the submarine or something. All I'm saying is that some trend is happening that has been predicted. And so either you've got your choice once again. It's all, just go home and take the, what is it, the blue pill, you know, the Matrix, the blue pill, the red pill. Take the blue pill, what happens? You go back to sleep and you don't remember any of this. You can do that. It's all a hoax. That guy's nuts. Or you could pick up this book, spend some more time with it and go, whoa, there's something bigger than this behind what I see. And so, as we've said, we've seen this is the architect, this is the sea beast, the front man, the muscle. So, as we wrap up this session, here's the question I want to leave you with. Why on earth would this God fellow, or this Jesus, Rabbi, Messiah, holy man, why would they go to the effort of writing this book and giving us all this stuff? What's the point? What's the purpose of it? I'd like to suggest that the same in the Bible, the same Jesus that gives the book of Revelation also spoke these words in the Gospel of Matthew. And he says this, speaking of those end-time events we talked about a few nights ago. He says, so you also, when you see all these things, and that's all these signs that he gave, and that would include the things we looked at here tonight as well. When you see all these things, know that it is near at the doors, which is a Hebrew expression for basically saying that the doors are bursting to open. But here's the question, what is it? So I'll ask you, are you seeing some of these things happening right now? Absolutely. So when we see them, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to know that it, whatever it is bursting at the door. It's trying to burst right through. And what is it? I'll tell you. It, according to Jesus, is his return. Now, you can say, okay, that was pretty interesting up until that point, Robbie. Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but that's what the book says. It's given us all this amazing insights to say one amazing point. Something is about to burst onto the world stage. My last empire has gotten really small. It was big and bushy. However, they did give us some thrones. By the way, I don't know who does all this stage decorating, but it's a pretty good job, isn't it? Oh, here she is. Round of applause for our stage decorator. Fantastic. I've been told tomorrow's going to be even more amazing. You'll see it tomorrow. But here's our last empire. This is the thing that stone down there was all about. This is the thing that those signs were all pointing to. This is the thing that the sea beast doesn't want you to be focused on. This is the thing that this land beast is trying to force you away from. But this Jesus fellow says, no. When you see these things happen, it is about to burst through the door. Phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. He puts it this way, speaking to his disciples, he says, now I tell you before it comes, referring to prophecy in general. I tell you before it comes that when it does come to pass, you may believe that I am he. And in Greek it is the I am, which is the language that was used with Moses in the Old Testament, which says, I'm Jehovah. So when you see it, It's supposed to strengthen your belief. I don't want to see my American friends go down this road. I don't want to see my friends in the Roman Church go down this road. But as I see it, my faith is strengthened in this book, and that there's someone bigger than all of it. So why does he want us to believe? What's the point? It's very simple. Because in the Old Testament, he says, the Jehovah of the Old Testament says, look to who? That means trust me. And be saved, all you from the ends of the earth, for I am God and there is none other. We started on the first night with that prophecy that said, well, not prophecy, the instruction that said, I'm God, there's no one else. You want to know how I can prove it? I'll tell you what's going to happen before it happens. And when you see it, I want you to look to me, I want you to trust in me, and I can save you because I am God and there is no one else. And it's really just this simple. This story of the cross that you're familiar with, he says, look at me, what's stopping you? That's it.